My name is Rachel Harrison. I'm 40 years old, and I'm a CPA. Last October, I stood in the doorway of my mother's lavish retirement party, a party I had quietly paid the deposit for, and listened to a room full of relatives whisper that I was the cold daughter who never lifted a finger for Diane. 0:14, an hour later, my sister waved over a security guard and said, loud enough for the whole ballroom to hear, "Security, remove this woman. She's upsetting the guests." My mom stood 10 feet away. She looked at the flowers. 0:19, so I left without a word, drove home, and did one thing that took me less than 10 minutes. By the time I stepped out of the shower, my phone showed 62 missed calls, and my mother and my sister were standing on my front porch in their party dresses. 0:33, they thought that email was my revenge. It wasn't. It was just the invoice. 0:40, what happened over the next 9 weeks, the unpaid bills, the paperwork my sister never wanted anyone to see, and the offer my mother made at my front door. That's the part none of them saw coming. Welcome back to Quiet Reckonings, where the women who paid the bills stop paying for the family show, and every boundary comes with a receipt. 0:57, if you've ever been the one who did everything and got credit for nothing, this story is for you. Drop a comment below, and be sure to subscribe. The invitation came through the family group text, the same thread where uncles sell tools and argue about potato salad. Celebrating Diane's retirement, Crestwood Country Club, the Lakeview Ballroom, 7 o'clock. Hosted by Courtney. 1:14. Hosted by Courtney. I read that line twice because back in July, Courtney had called me with her honey voice on. The club wants a deposit to hold the date. $4,200.
Just put it on your visa, Ratch.
I'll pay you back the second my retainer clears. 1:24. I'm a CPA. I know what it means when someone's retainers never clear. But this was Mom's party. Her 28 years at Riverside Hospital. Her one big night. So, I paid it the way I'd been paying things for 6 years. Quietly, directly, with no announcements. Nobody ever mentioned the deposit again. Not Courtney, not Mom. It sat on my statement like a guest nobody bothers to introduce. 1:50, the night of the party, I put on the gray sheath dress I wear to client dinners and wrapped 2 gifts. The first was a photo album I'd spent 6 weeks building. Mom at her admitting desk in 1996. Mom with her awful highlights at the company picnic. Mom holding baby Courtney on the front steps of the duplex. 2:04. The second was a check folded inside a card for the watercolor classes she'd mentioned for 15 years and never once signed up for, something she'd do with her own hands for nobody's camera. 2:18, I drove the 18 minutes to Crestwood with the gifts on the passenger seat, and I remember thinking the parking lot looked full for a hospital admitting clerk's retirement. I had no idea I was about to walk into the most expensive party I never agreed to buy. 2:34. The Lakeview Ballroom didn't look like a retirement party. It looked like a bar mitzvah that had lost the boy. There was a floral wall by the entrance, blush ranunculus and eucalyptus, the kind brides rent by the panel, a photo booth with rose gold letters spelling, "Cheers to Diane," a string trio in the corner, past appetizers on silver trays. I counted maybe 150 guests, which was odd because Mom's actual life held about 45 people. 2:58. The rest were faces from Courtney's world. Vendors, club friends, women with white teeth and cream dresses who said, "So sweet, so chic." And in the middle of it all was my sister, headset adjacent, directing a photographer like a tiny general. Get Mom under the arch. No, laughing. Get her laughing. 3:14. My mother stood under the flower arch in a champagne-colored dress I'd never seen, and she was glowing. I want to be fair about that. She looked happier than she'd looked since my father died. And some part of me was glad, even standing there invisible in my client dinner gray. 3:30, but the CPA in me was doing what it always does. Florals like that run 5 figures. The Lakeview room runs 4 figures. The trio, the trays, the photographer. I was standing inside a 6-figure evening for a woman whose pension I could recite from memory. 3:48. Every detail was built to be photographed. And I wasn't in a single frame. Nobody handed me a corsage. Nobody had saved me a seat at the family table. I checked the place cards twice. 4 o'clock, I set my 2 gifts on the gift table between an orchid and a basket wrapped in cellophane, and I asked myself the question I should have asked in July. Who exactly is paying for all of this? 4:14. I heard it by the champagne table from 2 cousins on my mother's side who didn't know I was behind them. The taller one, Beatrice, leaned toward the other and nodded across the room at me before she realized I'd drifted within earshot. 4:25. There's the cold one who never lifts a finger, she said in the tone you'd use for weather. Hasn't done a thing for Diane since Robert passed. Thank God for Courtney. 4:34. The other one made a little sound of agreement, the hum women make in a voting line. I stood there holding a flute of sparkling rose, and the strange thing is I didn't feel stabbed. I felt like I was reading a billing statement with someone else's name on the account. 4:48. Never lifted a finger. I had lifted the roof over my mother's head. Literally $9,600 of it 3 years ago when the cedar shakes let the storm in. But that wasn't the part that stopped my breath. 5 o'clock. It was the smoothness. Beatrice didn't say it like gossip. She said it like a fact everyone had agreed on years ago, a thing so settled it wasn't even interesting anymore. You don't get a sentence that's smooth overnight. 5:14. Somebody writes it, repeats it, and passes it around holidays like a casserole dish until a woman can say it at a champagne table without checking who's listening. 5:24. I looked across the ballroom at my sister laughing under the flower arch with her arm around my mother. Both of them turned toward the camera, and for the first time in 6 years, I asked myself not why they believed it, but who had been telling it. 5:40. I decided to do the simplest thing in the room. I decided to hug my mother. 5:46. I crossed the floor while the trio played something soft, and I got within 10 feet of the flower arch before Courtney stepped into my path like a velvet rope. 5:58. Up close, her smile was still on, but only the bottom half. You're not going to make this weird, are you? She said quietly. 6:04. I came to congratulate Mom, I said. And I watched my sister do the math of the moment. The photographer to her left, the cream women to her right, 150 witnesses to whatever happened next. And I watched her choose. 6:20. She turned toward the gray-jacketed man by the wall, lifted her hand, and raised her voice to carrying range. 6:26. Security. Remove this woman. She's upsetting the guests. The trio kept playing, but conversation died in a ring around us, the way water goes still around a drop stone. 6:38. The guard came over looking apologetic. He was somebody's nephew with an earpiece. And here is the detail I need you to hold on to, because I've held on to it every day since. 6:50. My mother was 10 feet away. She heard it. Everyone heard it. 6:55. And my mom, the woman whose winter heating bill I'd been paying for 6 winters in a row, turned her face to the flower wall and studied the ranunculus. She didn't say my name. 7:04. I stood there one more second. Then I walked to the gift table, set down the album, set the card with the watercolor check on top of it, and smoothed the ribbon flat. 7:16. Enjoy the party, Mom, I said to nobody in particular, in a voice that did not shake. Then I walked past the photo booth, past the rose gold letters cheering for Diane, out into the October air. 7:30. Behind me, I heard the trio slide into another song. Nobody followed me. 7:38. I sat in my car in the Crestwood parking lot, and I did not cry, which I know is exactly what they'd expect me to say. The frigid one sitting frigidly in her practical sedan. 7:50. But here's what actually happens inside me when the ground moves. I count. It's what I've done since I was a kid, and it's what I did then, with my hands at 10 and 2 in a parked car. 8 o'clock. 6 winters of heating bills at about $2,400 each. Homeowners insurance. The supplemental dental premium that renews every January like a toothache. The HVAC service contract. The gutters I paid to install in year 3. The storm-damaged roof. $9,600. Dad's final medical bills. $22,000, paid off in 14 quiet installments, so Mom would never see a collections letter with his name on it. 8/24, call it $16,000 a year, 6 years running, before the roof and the debt. I sat there and watched the total assemble itself the way it does on a clean reconciliation, clean and undeniable. 840, and underneath the total, a plain little truth I'd been refusing to book for years. I had been paying for the privilege of being invisible. 852, useless woman. The words didn't burn anymore. They itemized. Every dollar had bought me another year of being the daughter who never lifted a finger, because nobody watches the hand that pays the utility online. 906, inside that ballroom, my sister was toasting with champagne that wasn't paid for, in front of a flower wall that wasn't paid for, taking credit that wasn't paid for either. 918, I started the car. I drove the 18 minutes home under the speed limit, calm as a Sunday. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to make a scene. I was going to do something much quieter than that. 934, my kitchen table has been my real office for years. And at 8:53 that night, it became a courtroom, a bank, and a moving truck all at once. 9:46, I opened my laptop, and my dog Mocha settled on my feet the way he does when I work late. And I wrote the shortest important email of my life. 10 o'clock, I addressed it to the family thread, all 34 relatives who had watched me get walked out by security an hour earlier. I added Mom and Courtney at the top. Subject line: effective tonight. No greeting. 10:18. Effective tonight. I am resigning as Mom's unpaid financial manager, a role I have held since Dad died 6 years ago. All automatic payments from my accounts, property tax, homeowner's insurance, supplemental dental, HVAC service, utilities, will end at the close of this billing cycle. 10:36. A one-page summary of the last 6 years is attached for the family's records. The $4,200 deposit for tonight's party is currently on my Visa account. The venue contract itself is in Courtney Mark's name. 10:50. Going forward, please direct all financial matters to Mom and Courtney, who I understand has been taking care of everything. Rachel, the attachment was one page because the truth usually is. Line items, dates, the roof, the hospital debt. At the bottom, a total. $103,500. 11:14. No adjectives anywhere in the document. Adjectives are what my sister uses. Numbers are what I use. And numbers don't need a microphone. 11:26. I read it twice, not to soften it, to check the math. The math was right. It had been right for 6 years, sitting in the dark with me. 11:38. I clicked send at 8:53, closed the laptop, and went to take a shower like a woman with nothing on her calendar, which, for the first time in 6 years, I was. 11:52. I take long showers when I finish something big. Ask any CPA what March feels like. I stayed in until the water went lukewarm, dried my hair all the way, moisturized like a woman with excellent boundaries, and walked back to the kitchen at about 9:45. 12:14. My phone was lit up like a slot machine paying out. 62 missed calls. I stood in my robe and scrolled. The lock screen while Mocha watched me. Courtney, 19 times. Mom, 14. My Aunt Gail, 11. My Uncle Russell, 8. The rest were cousins I hadn't spoken to since the funeral, including, and I want this noted for the record, Beatrice from the champagne table. There were voicemails. 12:44. Courtney's first one was a remarkable specimen. Her voice had been dipped in syrup and panic at the same time. Rachel.
Ratch.
Hey, I think your email got hacked. Or look, whatever this is, just call me. We can fix the wording. People are reading it. Mom is very upset. 13:02. 2 hours earlier, this same voice had said, security, remove this woman, at carrying range in front of a string trio. Funny what a one-page attachment does to a person's tone. 13:18. Gail's voicemail was different. One piece of it I will keep forever. Honey, call me. And good for you. And then buried under all the family noise, one text from a number I didn't know. 13:38. Crestwood Events After Hours line. Ms. Harrison, trying to reach Courtney Marks regarding tonight's outstanding balance. Your card is listed on the deposit. Please advise. 13:50. Outstanding balance. I looked at that phrase for a long moment, standing in my kitchen with my hair still warm from the dryer, and somewhere under my ribs, a small cold bell began to ring. The party wasn't paid for. 14:08. Headlights swept across my kitchen window at 10:14. I live 14 minutes from my mother and 18 from the club. And apparently, that's exactly how long dignity lasts in a crisis. 14:22, through the front lights, I watched two women come up my walk in the most expensive clothes of their lives. Courtney, still in her hostess dress, phone glowing in her fist like a weapon she couldn't fire. And behind her, my mom, still wearing her corsage. Somebody had pinned it on her at 7 o'clock when the night was perfect. 14:46. Courtney knocked the way process, servers knock. Rachel. Open the door. Rachel. 14:54. Mocha gave one low woof and looked at me for instructions. And I just stood there a second in my robe, in my own warm kitchen, taking in a sight I had never seen in 6 years of paying that family's bills. 15:10. They had come to me. Not a text telling me where to send money. Not a group thread where my name only appeared under, "Can you cover this?" My mother and my sister on my porch at night, needing something only I could give them. 15:30, and for the first time, the thing they needed wasn't my card number. It was my silence back. They wanted the email unsent, the total unadded. The quiet daughter returned to her quiet. 15:48. I looked down at Mocha. "That's not for sale anymore," I told him. He seemed to accept this. Then I tightened the belt on my robe, and I opened the door. 16:02. Before I tell you what my sister said on that porch, let me ask you something. Have you ever been the one who paid quietly while somebody louder took the bow? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and hit subscribe. 16:20. Because what came next told me exactly who my sister had always been. 16:26. Courtney came through the doorway talking, which is how she enters every room. "Okay, here's what's going to happen. You're going to send a follow-up saying the numbers were a draft, a projection, whatever accountants call it, and that emotions ran high." 16:46. "No," I said. "Just that." 16:50, and it was fascinating watching her recalibrate in real time, like a GPS after a missed exit. She downshifted into sweetness. 1700 hours, Ratch. "Rachel, we're sisters." Tonight got out of hand. The security thing was a misunderstanding. You know how parties are. 1710 then, when the sweetness bounced off me, she tried the third gear, the real one. 1716. You realize everyone's going to think you've lost it. Airing family business in writing to the whole thread. People will think you're unstable. 1730. And through all of it, my mother stood on my doormat in her corsage and said one sentence. One. People saw that email, Rachel. 1742. Not, is it true? Not, did you really carry me for 6 years? Not, why didn't I know the roof cost 9,000? 1754. People saw. 1800 hours. I looked at my mom for a long, quiet moment, and I finally understood the house I grew up in. It was never about what was happening. It was about what could be seen from the street. 1816. I kept my voice level, the voice I use when a client's numbers don't survive daylight. Everything in that email is accurate. If either of you finds one number that's wrong, I'll correct it to the whole thread by morning. 1834. Silence. Courtney's jaw worked. My mother looked at her shoes. 1842. Because here was the problem with the cold daughter who couldn't lift a finger. She had done the math right, and everyone copied on that email knew it. 1856. It's late, I said gently, and closed my own front door softly on the two best-dressed women in Pennsylvania. 1908. Through the wood, I heard Courtney's heels turn on my porch, and then one muffled sentence that told me she still hadn't read the room. She'll cave by Tuesday. 1924. To explain how a woman gets a name like Cold, I have to take you back 6 years to 5 weeks in a cardiac care unit and the funeral that came after. 1942. My dad, Robert Harrison, was the gentlest man in any room and the only member of my family who ever watched me work. When his heart finally quit, my mother folded like paper, which nobody blamed her for. And Courtney grieved the way she does everything, visibly, beautifully, in the arms of a rotating audience. 2006, somebody had to be the third kind of person. I was the one at the funeral home comparing urn prices while my hands went numb. I was the one who signed at the mortuary, canceled dad's cards, called the pension office, sat mom down at the bank when her name had to go on things alone for the first time in 40 years. 2034. At the service, relatives hugged Courtney in a line. Like a wedding reception, while I stood at the door, confirming the head count for the reception room. That's the picture everyone kept. Courtney weeping openly by the urn and Rachel by the guest book, dry-eyed, checking her phone. 2058. What the picture didn't show was the parking lot afterward, where I sat in my car between the service and the bank appointment and cried so hard my ribs ached, alone with the engine running for exactly as long as I could afford before wiping my face and going back to work. Nobody saw that because I've never grieved for an audience. The audience only writes down what it sees. 2134. I remember a Christmas years before, when Courtney had commandeered the living room for one of her performances, and Dad found me in the kitchen doing the dishes. He picked up a towel and stood beside me and said, "Quiet work still has to be done by somebody." 2158. He said it like a compliment. It took me 40 years to hear the warning in it. 2208. 2 weeks after we buried him, I found out what my father had been protecting my mother from. I sat at her kitchen table on Willow Creek Lane, the house they'd owned for 34 years, and opened the drawer where she'd been putting things she couldn't look at. 2230. Unopened envelopes, weeks of them. A modest pension. A mortgage almost done, but not quite. And hospital bills from those last 5 weeks totaling $22,000, addressed to a dead man. 2248. My mother sat across from me with her hands around a cold coffee, and she couldn't meet my eyes. And I want to be careful here, because this next part is the part I've had to forgive. 2304. Mom, let's get everyone together. You, me, Courtney. Put it all on the table. Make a plan as a family. And my mother, 60, then married her whole adult life to a man who handled every bill, grabbed my wrist, and begged. That's the only honest word. 2330. Please don't tell anyone.
Please.
Your father would be so ashamed if people knew he left me like this. 2342. What do you do with that? Tell the family anyway and strip your widowed mother of the one thing she had left, which was how things looked. 2354. So, I built the machine in the dark. Everything paid straight to the source. County, insurer, contractor. Never cash into anyone's hands. My own name kept off her debts. Records kept like the CPA I am. 2400 hours 14. I had asked for daylight and been begged into the dark by a grieving woman, and I said yes. And if you'd been sitting at that table, you'd have said yes, too. 2400 hours 30. About $16,000 a year. The roof in year 3. The hospital debt in 14 installments. 6 years. And the machine ran so quietly that the whole family forgot anyone was running it, or decided somebody else was. Now, the whisper at the champagne table. Sentences that smooth have an author. 2400 hours 58. And mine was written 2 years ago in my office on a Tuesday when Courtney came to see me with a folder and a dream. 25:12. She wanted $75,000 to relaunch her wedding planning company, but make it boutique. And she needed a co-signer. 25:24. And who better than her big sister with the good credit and the boring life? I did what I do for any client. I read her numbers. The business had been losing money for 3 years. The projections assumed her Instagram would somehow start paying vendors. As her sister, I wanted to believe. As a CPA, I would have been signing my name to a slow-motion car crash. 25:56, so I told her no, kindly, with a printout and 3 cheaper paths she could take instead. She smiled, thanked me, hugged me at the door, and then she went home and started writing. 26:14. I can't prove the exact date the sentence was born, but I can tell you what Gail confirmed for me later. From about that season on, the family version of Rachel changed. Rachel refuses to help family. Rachel's got all that money and won't lift a finger for Diane. Rachel was always cold, even at Robert's funeral. Remember the guest book? 26:46. A seed of truth watered with performance grows a whole field of lies. I had refused exactly one thing, to co-sign a bad loan. 27:00. By the time that sentence reached a champagne table 6 years after Dad died, it had grown into never lifted a finger, spoken over sparkling rose at a party sitting on my Visa card. 27:18. My sister didn't just spend money she didn't have. She spent my name and her business, by the way, the one I wouldn't sign for. Hold that thought. 27:34. The Saturday after the party, I did the thing I'm actually proudest of in this whole story, and it involved no revenge at all. I went to the office supply store and bought a black 3-ring binder, a pack of dividers, and sheet protectors. 27:56, and I sat at my kitchen table for 3 hours, building my mother's financial life into a shape she could hold. 28:06, tab 1, property tax. Account number, the county website, step-by-step screenshots. And the due date in red, November 30th, tab 2, homeowners insurance. Agent's direct line, renewal month. 28:24, tab 3, the supplemental dental, what it costs, what happens if it lapses. Tab 4, the HVAC contract. Tab 5, utilities, the budget billing option circled. Every contact a 63-year-old widow needs, in 14-point font. 28:48, no commentary. No line anywhere that said, this is what I carried while you called me useless. The numbers could say it without me. Quiet work still has to be done by somebody. And this binder was the last of mine she'd get for free. 29:10, and on the very last page, in its own sheet protector, I placed a business card. Margaret Chen, licensed professional fiduciary, a person whose entire job is managing money for older adults, bonded, insured, regulated. 29:30, the healthy, accountable version of what I'd been doing in the dark for 6 years. 29:38, Sunday afternoon, I drove the 14 minutes to Willow Creek Lane while Mom was at church, set the binder on the porch bench where she'd see it before her keys were out of her purse, and texted her from the driveway. Everything is in the binder. The tax bill is due November 30th. 29:58, then I drove home. 30:04, I'd like to tell you it felt like freedom. It felt like handing over a child I'd raised. But it was on her bench now, not in my dark. And whatever happened by Thanksgiving was going to happen in the light. 30:22, Aunt Gail showed up Monday evening with a Tupperware of lemon bars and the energy of a woman who has been waiting years to testify. Gail is my mother's younger sister, 59, widowed, allergic to nonsense. 30:42, she sat down at my kitchen table, pushed the lemon bars at me and said, "Sit down, honey. Let me tell you what your sister's been telling everyone for 6 years." 30:58, and then she drew me the map. Every Thanksgiving, every christening, every funeral. Courtney worked the room like a publicist. Little things.
A sigh.
I just wish Rachel would help more with Mom, but you know how she is. A brave smile. Somebody's got to be there for Diane. 31:20. The genius of it, Gail said, was that I never contradicted any of it, because I was never there when it was said. And when I was there, I was quiet. You left the stage empty, sweetheart. Your sister never met an empty stage she didn't fill. 31:44, I asked Gail why she never told me. 31:48, she looked at her hands. Because I half believed it. That's the ugly part. You never said different. 32:00, and there it was, the mechanism, laid out on my table between the lemon bars. In my family, the truth is whoever tells it first at Thanksgiving. For 6 years, Courtney had told it first, and I had assumed the work would speak for itself. Work doesn't speak. Work just works. 32:26. Then Gail told me the part that made me set down my fork. 32:32. Your Uncle Russell called your mother yesterday, read her your email line by line, and asked her point blank, "Is it true?" 103,000, Diane. Is it true? 32:50. I asked what Mom said. 32:52. Gail was quiet a second. She said, I never asked Rachel for any of it, which was technically perfectly accurate. She'd only ever asked me for the silence. 33:10. Wednesday morning, Crestwood called my office line. A polite, tired events manager named Alma, who had clearly spent 3 days in phone tag with my sister. 33:26. Ms. Harrison, I'm so sorry to bother you at work. We're holding an outstanding balance of $11,400 for the Lakeview Ballroom event. Ms. Marks hasn't returned our calls, and your card is the one we have on file from the deposit. 33:48. There it was, the six-figure evening itemized at last. The flower wall, the trio, the trays, the photographer. None of it paid. All of it drifting gently toward the only card in the building that had ever worked. 34:08. I was very polite because Alma was not the villain of this story. 34:14. My card authorized a $4,200 deposit in July. The signed contract for the event is in Courtney Marks' name. I'd encourage you to pursue the contract holder, and I'll email you now in writing revoking any authorization beyond the original deposit. 34:34. I could hear her typing. That's very clear. Thank you, she said, in the voice of a woman updating a file called Problem. 34:46. After we hung up, I sat back in my office chair and let myself feel the black comedy of it. 34:54. Security, remove this useless woman. 3 days later, the useless woman was the only person attached to that glittering evening whose money was real. 35:08. The useless woman had been the deposit for 6 years. 35:14. By Friday, Gail reported the florist was calling Courtney's voicemail, and the photographer who knew every planner in the county had started asking around. 35:28. In my sister's world, that's not a debt problem. That's a burning building. And I had just very politely declined to be the fire department. 35:44. Vendor World is a small town inside a small town. Within a week, the story of the unpaid Lakeview Ballroom had made its quiet rounds. Not because I told anyone, and that part matters. I never posted. I never forwarded. 36:04. I had sent one email to one family thread, and I let physics do the rest. 36:12. A bride who'd booked Courtney for a spring wedding called her and asked delicately about a deposit refund. The photographer stopped tagging her. Somebody's cream dress friend from the party asked somebody else whether Diane's daughters had some kind of situation. 36:32. The show my sister had spent years building ran on exactly one fuel, the appearance that everything was handled. 36:42. And appearances, it turns out, have creditors too. 36:48. Then came the phone call I never expected. Derek, my brother-in-law, a sales director who travels 4 days a week and has spent 12 years married to the performance without ever checking the ticket price. 37:06. He didn't say hello. He said, Rachel, whatever's going on with Courtney's books, is it bad? 37:14. And I stood in my kitchen holding the phone, genuinely surprised by what I felt, which was pity in every direction. He wasn't calling to defend her. He was calling because he'd seen the Crestwood number on her silenced phone, and a vendor had said something at the gym, and he was doing the thing everyone in this family does, coming to the accountant privately in the dark. 37:42. I gave him the only sentence he was entitled to. 2 years ago, she asked me to co-sign $75,000 for the studio, and I read her numbers and I refused. That's all you need to know. And you should ask your wife the rest. 37:58. A long pause. 38:00. She said you refused because you were jealous. 38:04. I know, I said. Ask her anyway. 38:10. Sunday night. 2 weeks after the party, my mother left me a voicemail, and it was nothing like the 14 calls from the night of the email. 38:22. No, people saw. No, your sister didn't mean it. Her voice was small and flat, the way it sounded the year Dad died. And she talked to my machine like it was a priest. 38:38. The binder is on my kitchen table. I've been reading it every night this week. Rachel, I don't understand half of it. I'm 63 years old, and I have never once paid the property tax myself. Your father did it. And then I suppose I told myself it was handling itself. 39:00. A pause long enough that I thought the message had ended. 39:06. Then did you really do all of this all these years?
Don't answer that.
I know you did. It's all got your handwriting on it. 39:20. Another pause. 39:22. Call me back when you're ready. Not before. I'm learning tab 5, the budget billing. 39:30. Click. 39:32. I stood by the counter and played it 3 times, and Mocha leaned on my shin. And I'm not going to pretend to you that my eyes were dry, because the cold thing was always a lie. 39:48. Here's what I did not do. 39:52. I did not grab my keys. For 6 years, a voicemail 1/10 that sad would have had me on Willow Creek Lane in 14 minutes with my laptop and my checkbook, fixing before anyone finished asking. 40:10. The old Rachel answered, need like a fire alarm. The new one sat down, finished her tea, and let her mother sit with tab 5, because rescue was the family drug, and I was done being the supply. 40:30. I waited 2 days. And what happened in those 2 days, I did not see coming. 40:38. Quick pause. If you've made it this far, you know this story isn't really about money. It's about who gets believed. Tell me in the comments, were you the binder person in your family, or did you know one? And hit subscribe. 40:58. Because the paperwork my sister brought to my mother's kitchen was worse than anything I'd imagined. 41:08. Tuesday afternoon, I sat at my mother's kitchen table for the first time since the party, and the black binder sat between us like a third guest. 41:22. She had sticky notes in it. That undid me a little. Small yellow flags in her handwriting, one marking the county website, one on the insurance tab that just said, Agent equals Karen. 41:38. She'd made us coffee in the good cups. And then my mother folded her hands and produced the sentence she'd clearly been rehearsing. 41:50, and it was so precisely wrong that it told me everything. 41:56. Families help each other, Rachel. I just don't understand why you needed credit for it. 42:06. Credit. 42:08. I looked at her. This woman I love. And I saw the whole architecture. In her world, there are only 2 currencies. 42:20. Help, which is invisible and infinite, and simply appears like weather. And credit, which is what vain people demand. 42:34. 28 years running a hospital admitting office. Their marriages behind them. She had never once seen the machinery of her own life. Money, to my mother, was a thing that worked out. Somebody always made it work out. 42:54. I didn't argue. I've learned you can't audit a worldview across a coffee cup. 43:02. Instead, I asked one question gently, the way you'd hand someone a mirror. 43:08. Mom, what do you think the property tax on this house is per year? Just guess. 43:16. She smoothed the tablecloth. I don't know. A few hundred. 43:22. I let the number sit in the air between us. Then I opened tab 1 and turned it toward her. 43:32. $4,800 a year, give or take. 6 Novembers in a row. 43:38. My mother looked at the page for a long time, and I watched something more painful than surprise cross her face. It wasn't that she hadn't known. It was that she could have known any year she wanted to. And some part of her had voted every year not to. 44:00. We were on tab 3 when the front door opened without a knock, and my sister walked into the kitchen carrying a leather folio and the smell of vanilla and crisis. 44:14. Gail had mentioned the meeting to Russell, and Russell, God love him, cannot hold water. 44:22. Courtney didn't sit. She stood at the head of the table like it was a podium and went to work on my 1-page summary. And I have to tell you, as a professional, it was almost impressive. 44:38. Mom, you cannot just accept her numbers. She's an accountant. They can make paper say anything. Half of this is inflated. The roof was not 9,000. That's insane. She's punishing us. She's been waiting years to hold this over you. And the second your beautiful night came, boom. Here's an invoice. Because she cannot stand for anyone else to shine. 45:08. Notice the shape of it. Not one specific error. An aroma of error. 45:16. Which line is wrong? I said evenly. Pick one, and I'll pull the receipt right now. 45:26. She didn't pick a line, because there was no line to pick. 45:32. She pivoted to the softer weapon. Her eyes went glossy on cue. Her voice dropped into the wounded register. And she knelt next to Mom's chair. 45:46. I planned that whole party for you. Every flower. And she turned it into this. 45:54. And my mother, who had just seen tab 1 with her own eyes, wavered. I watched it happen. Her hand went to Courtney's hair, and her face turned toward me with an expression that said, "Can't you just be the bigger person?" 46:16, which, in our family, has only ever meant the quieter one. 46:24. Something in me went very calm. The way the office goes calm when I finally find the error in a client's books. I couldn't win a storytelling contest against my sister. I'd lose every time. 46:42. So, for the first time in my life, I stopped entering. 46:48. As I stood to rinse my cup, Courtney set her folio on the counter, and the flap fell open an inch, enough for me to see the letterhead on the papers inside. A mortgage company. 47:06. Gail called the next morning while I was with a client and left a message that emptied my lungs. Call me. It's about the house. 47:18. Here's what she'd pieced together from Russell and from Mom herself. 47:24. That folio was a reverse mortgage.